Covering her graying hair, Maria pushed her cleaning cart through the carpeted hallways. Her face, furrowed with wrinkles that told stories of a life of hard work, reflected a quiet determination. Despite the difficulties she faced, Maria never lost her kindness or her unwavering work ethic. As she moved down the hallway, she heard angry voices coming from one of the offices. She immediately recognized the harsh and demanding voice of Mr. Rodriguez. The company's general manager was an intimidating middle-aged man with a reputation for being a relentless and unsympathetic boss. Maria knew that Mr. Rodriguez treated her with disdain, often scorning her work and criticizing every small detail. But instead of responding with anger or resentment, she simply nodded and continued with her work. Over the years, she had learned that the best way to deal with difficult people was with patience and humility. As she approached Mr. Rodriguez's office, she heard his voice getting louder, followed by the sound of something hitting the wall. Maria shuddered but maintained her serene expression. She knew it wasn't her place to question Mr. Rodriguez's actions, even when his behavior was unacceptable. When she finally finished her shift, Maria gathered her cleaning supplies and headed to Mr. Rodriguez's office to do the final cleaning. After so many years on the job, she had learned to ignore the shouting and outbursts of anger, focusing on doing her job in the best way possible. As she approached the closed door, she heard an unsettling silence. Normally, Mr. Rodriguez would be talking on the phone or furiously typing on his computer, but on this occasion, there was no sound. Maria knocked softly on the door, but there was no response. Slowly, she turned the knob and pushed the door open, expecting to find Mr. Rodriguez immersed in his work as usual. But what she saw left her paralyzed. Mr. Rodriguez was sitting in his leather chair, his head tilted back and his eyes glassy. His mouth was open, and white foam was forming at the corners of his lips. His body was rigid and motionless, as if it had been frozen in time. Maria felt her heart racing and a chill ran down her spine. She had never seen anything like it, and for a moment, she didn't know how to react. But then her instinct and experience as a mother and grandmother guided her. With trembling hands, she took out her cell phone and dialed the emergency number. While waiting for them to answer, she cautiously approached Mr. Rodriguez and placed 2 fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. She could faintly feel a heartbeat, which meant there was still hope. When the operator answered, Maria explained the situation in a calm but urgent voice. She was given instructions to try to revive Mr. Rodriguez and keep him alive until help arrived. Without hesitation, Maria followed the instructions to the letter. She dragged Mr. Rodriguez from his chair and placed him on the floor. Then she began to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and chest compressions. She had never had to do this before, but her determination drove her to keep going. The minutes seemed like endless hours as Maria worked tirelessly to keep Mr. Rodriguez alive. Her forehead was beaded with sweat, and her arms burned from the effort, but she didn't stop. At that moment, all that mattered was saving a life. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the sound of ambulance sirens was heard in the distance. Maria felt immense relief, but she didn't allow herself to relax. She continued with the chest compressions until the paramedics burst into the office. The health professionals moved quickly, taking control of the situation. They placed an oxygen mask over Mr. Rodriguez's face and began administering intravenous medications. As they placed him on a stretcher, one of the paramedics approached Maria. "Ma'am, you have acted bravely and with determination today," he said sincerely. "If it hadn't been for your quick actions, this man wouldn't be alive right now. You've saved a life." Maria nodded humbly, not knowing what to say. She had never sought recognition or praise, she had simply done what she believed was right. As she watched Mr. Rodriguez being taken to the ambulance, Maria wondered how this experience would change things between them. Would he finally see her as a valuable person worthy of respect, or would he simply go back to treating her with disdain once he recovered? Only time would tell, but for now, Maria felt grateful to have been able to help. She had shown that even in the most adverse circumstances, kindness and compassion could prevail. And that was something she could be proud of. The sound of sirens echoed through the empty hallways of the office building as the paramedics rushed towards Mr. Rodriguez's office. Maria quickly guided them, her mind still processing the terrifying events she had just witnessed. When the paramedics entered the office, Maria stayed in the doorway, watching cautiously as they assessed Mr. Rodriguez's condition. Despite her continued resuscitation efforts, his face still looked pale and lifeless, and white foam continued to ooze from his half-open mouth. One of the paramedics, a tall, burly man, approached Maria with a look of concern on his face. "Ma'am, we need you to tell us exactly what happened here," he said urgently. Maria nodded and proceeded to relate the facts in a pained but firm voice. She explained how she had found Mr. Rodriguez unconscious in his chair, with no obvious signs of what could have caused such a state. She mentioned having immediately called emergency services and following instructions to try to revive him. The paramedic listened attentively, taking quick notes in a small notebook. "You did the right thing by acting so quickly," he affirmed. "If it hadn't been for your actions, this man probably wouldn't have survived." Maria felt a lump in her throat at those words. She had never expected to find herself in such a situation, and the idea of having saved a life overwhelmed her. But there was no time to reflect, as the paramedics needed all the possible information to treat Mr. Rodriguez effectively. "Did you notice anything unusual in the office? Any strange smell or suspicious substance?" the paramedic asked, his eyes scanning the environment for clues. Maria shook her head. Everything seemed normal except for. She stopped, remembering something she had overlooked in her rush to help Mr. Rodriguez. "There was a coffee cup on his desk," she added slowly. "I remember seeing it when I came in." The paramedic frowned. "Did you notice anything unusual about that cup?" Maria struggled to remember every detail. "No, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a white cup with the company logo." Nodding, the paramedic signaled to one of his colleagues, who immediately picked up the cup and placed it in a sealed plastic bag. "We'll send it for analysis to look for possible toxic substances," he explained. As the paramedics continued to work frantically on Mr. Rodriguez, Maria watched in silence, feeling a wave of mixed emotions. On one hand, she was grateful to have been able to respond quickly and perform first aid. But on the other, she felt overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation and worried about Mr. Rodriguez's well-being. Despite his contemptuous treatment of her in the past, after what seemed like an eternity, the paramedics managed to stabilize Mr. Rodriguez enough to transport him to the hospital. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, Maria could see that his face had regained some color, although he still looked unconscious. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us to the hospital," said the paramedic who had taken her statement. "The doctors may have more questions, and your testimony will be crucial in determining what happened here." Maria nodded obediently, despite the fatigue that was beginning to overtake her. She knew her role in this drama was not yet over, and she was determined to do everything possible to help. In the ambulance, as the vehicle quickly moved through the city streets, Maria observed Mr. Rodriguez, now connected to various monitors and with an oxygen mask covering his face. Despite their past differences, she couldn't help but feel compassion for him. Whatever had happened to him, no one deserved to face such a situation. Upon arriving at the hospital, the paramedics transferred Mr. Rodriguez to the emergency area, where a team of doctors and nurses were waiting for him. Maria was led to a waiting room where she was told someone would come to talk to her soon. Minutes turned into hours, and Maria found herself struggling to stay awake. Physical and emotional exhaustion was beginning to take its toll, but she refused to give up. She needed to know that Mr. Rodriguez would be okay and that her intervention had not been in vain. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a woman in a white coat approached her. "Mrs. Maria?" she asked kindly. Maria nodded, standing up with some difficulty. "I'm Dr. Vargas, and I was in charge of Mr. Rodriguez's treatment," the woman explained. "First, let me thank you for your quick and brave actions. If you hadn't acted so fast, it's very likely we wouldn't have been able to save his life." A sigh of relief escaped Maria's lips. "Then he's going to be okay?" she asked anxiously. Dr. Vargas nodded. "For now, we've managed to stabilize him, but we're still not sure what caused his initial condition." The analysis of the coffee cup that the paramedics brought revealed traces of a toxic substance, possibly poison. Maria stifled a cry of surprise, bringing a hand to her mouth. Poison? Who would want to poison Mr. Rodriguez? That's an excellent question, the doctor replied gravely, and one that the police will have to investigate. For now, our focus is on keeping Mr. Rodriguez stable and monitoring any side effects of the toxin he ingested. Maria nodded slowly, her mind spinning. Who would have motives to want to harm Mr. Rodriguez in that way? Despite his difficult behavior, she couldn't imagine anyone wishing him such harm. Mrs. Maria, I know it's been an endless day for you, said Dr. Vargas with compassion, but we need you to provide us with all the possible details about what you saw and experienced today. Any information, no matter how small it may seem, could be crucial. Maria took a deep breath and nodded with determination. She was exhausted, but she knew her role in this was not yet over. In a calm voice, she began to relate everything that had happened from the moment she entered Mr. Rodriguez's office, omitting no detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. The following days passed in a blur for Maria. After her exhaustive account of the events to Dr. Vargas, she was taken to an interrogation room where the police asked her countless questions about the incident with Mr. Rodriguez. Maria responded with patience and honesty, trying to remember every detail, no matter how small. Finally, after hours of interrogation, she was allowed to return home, but sleep eluded her that night, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. Who would have wanted to poison Mr. Rodriguez, and why? Despite his harsh behavior, she couldn't imagine anyone wanting to hurt him in that way. Days turned into weeks, and Maria found herself immersed in a routine of work and hospital visits to provide more statements to the police. Mr. Rodriguez had been transferred to the intensive care unit, fighting for his life while doctors worked to counteract the effects of the poison. Despite his contemptuous treatment of her in the past, Maria couldn't help but feel a deep concern for her former boss. After all, she had witnessed his struggle to survive and had done everything possible to keep him alive. She had seen a vulnerability in him that she had never witnessed before, and that awakened an unexpected compassion in her heart. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Maria received the news that Mr. Rodriguez had awakened and was recovering. She felt immense relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. A few days later, while Maria was doing her usual cleaning round in the office building, her supervisor called her aside. "Maria, Mr. Rodriguez has requested to see you," he said with a curious look. "He wants to thank you in person for saving his life." Maria felt a wave of nervousness but nodded with determination. After all that had happened, she knew this encounter was inevitable. When she arrived at Mr. Rodriguez's office floor, she was greeted by one of his assistants, who led her to a private meeting room. There, sitting in a wheelchair, was Mr. Rodriguez himself. Maria held her breath as she saw how emaciated he looked. His skin was pale and sunken, and he had lost a considerable amount of weight, but his eyes, although tired, shone with a new light, one that Maria had never seen before. "Mrs. Maria, please take a seat," he said in a hoarse voice, gesturing towards a chair in front of him. Obediently, Maria sat down, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. Mr. Rodriguez observed her for a long moment, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally, he sighed deeply and spoke. "I have no way to adequately express my gratitude to you," he began. "You saved my life. Regardless of how I've treated you in the past, you acted with courage and determination when I was on the brink of death, and for that, I will be eternally indebted to you." Maria felt her eyes fill with tears at the sincerity of his words. She had never expected to hear such praise from the man who had once treated her with disdain. "It was nothing, sir," she responded humbly. "Anyone would have done the same in my place." Mr. Rodriguez shook his head. "No, you are an exceptional person, Maria. Despite my bad behavior, you always treated me with respect and compassion, and when I needed it most, you were there for me." He paused, his face darkening. "What happened was an attempted murder. Someone in this company wanted to see me dead, and they almost succeeded." Maria stifled a gasp of surprise. She had suspected something like this, but hearing it directly from Mr. Rodriguez made it more real and terrifying. "The police are still investigating, but so far they haven't found any solid leads," he continued. "But that's beside the point now. What really matters is that you gave me a second chance at life, and I don't intend to waste it. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Maria, I want to offer you a new position as my personal assistant. You'll be my right hand, in charge of ensuring that everything in this office runs smoothly, and of course, you'll receive a substantial salary increase. Maria was stunned. Never, not even in her wildest dreams, would she have imagined such an offer. She, a simple cleaning lady, becoming the personal assistant of Mr. Rodriguez himself. Sir, I don't know what to say, she stammered. It's an honor, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a position. Mr. Rodriguez shook his head firmly. You are more than qualified, Maria. You have demonstrated a strength of character and compassion that very few possess. Those are invaluable qualities in this ruthless business world. Maria considered for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. It would be a drastic change in her life, but also an opportunity that few people like her were lucky enough to receive. Finally, she nodded slowly. I accept your offer, Mr. Rodriguez. And I promise I'll do everything possible to be an excellent assistant. A genuine smile lit up Mr. Rodriguez's face, an expression that Maria had never seen before. I'm sure you will, Maria. I'm looking forward to working with you in this new stage of our lives. As Maria left the meeting room, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her life had taken an unexpected turn, and although the road ahead was uncertain, she was determined to make the most of it. Mr. Rodriguez had been given a second chance, and so had she. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Maria. After accepting her new position as Mr. Rodriguez's personal assistant, she found herself immersed in a completely new and unfamiliar world. The first day was a baptism of fire. Maria arrived early at the office building, wearing her best outfit, although she still felt out of place among the elegant executives circulating through the hallways. When she entered Mr. Rodriguez's office, she was greeted by her new work area, a spacious oak desk with a state-of-the-art computer and a multi-line telephone. Mr. Rodriguez, still confined to a wheelchair due to his persistent weakness, greeted her with a warm smile. Good morning, Maria. I'm eager to start working together. Maria nodded, swallowing nervously. Me too, sir. Please tell me what I should do. The following hours were a whirlwind of instructions, tasks, and responsibilities. Mr. Rodriguez guided her through his daily schedule, teaching her how to answer calls, schedule meetings, and handle his correspondence. Maria felt overwhelmed at first, but her determination drove her forward. As the days passed, Maria began to feel more comfortable in her new role. She learned to anticipate Mr. Rodriguez's needs and keep his schedule organized. Her efficiency and attention to detail impressed her boss, who praised her dedication on repeated occasions. But not everything was easy. Some of the other executives looked at Maria with disdain, questioning her sudden rise from the cleaning ranks. There were whispers and contemptuous looks, but Maria ignored them with dignity. She knew she had earned her position fairly and wasn't going to let anyone belittle her achievements. As the weeks passed, Maria and Mr. Rodriguez developed a fluid and effective working dynamic. He trusted her to handle his most delicate affairs, and she learned to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. But the most surprising thing was the change in Mr. Rodriguez's attitude towards her. Where before there had been disdain and lack of respect, now there was genuine camaraderie and appreciation. He treated her as an equal, listening to her opinions and valuing her perspective. Maria, I don't know what I'd do without you, he told her one day as they reviewed some financial reports together. You've been a pillar of strength for me during my recovery, and I can't thank you enough. Maria felt a surge of pride at his words. She had never expected such recognition from the man who had once treated her with contempt. As time passed, the bond between Maria and Mr. Rodriguez strengthened. He began to trust her not only with work matters but also with his personal concerns. He spoke to her about his failed marriage and his estrangement from his children, and Maria listened with compassion, offering advice and support when she could. For her part, Maria also opened up more, sharing stories of her own life and her struggle to support her family. Mr. Rodriguez listened attentively, showing a renewed respect for her strength and dedication. One day, as they worked together on an important project, Mr. Rodriguez paused and looked at Maria with a serious expression. You know, Maria, when you saved my life, I never imagined we'd end up being close friends, he said frankly. But now I can't imagine my life without you in it. Maria was moved by his words. Neither can I, sir. You've changed so much since that day, and I feel honored to have been part of that change. He nodded slowly. That experience opened my eyes to what's really important in life. Before, I was so focused on success and power that I lost sight of what really matters: human connections, compassion, and kindness. He extended his hand and took Maria's warmly. You represent those values, Maria. Your courage and kindness inspired me to be a better person. Thanks to you, I have a second chance to live a fuller and more meaningful life. Maria felt her eyes fill with tears at the sincerity of his words. She never would have imagined that a simple act of kindness would trigger such a profound change, not only in Mr. Rodriguez's life but also in her own. At that moment, she knew that her friendship with Mr. Rodriguez was truly special. They had overcome adversities and obstacles and had emerged as better and wiser people. Although their relationship had begun in a turbulent way, it was now sealed by a bond of mutual respect and genuine appreciation. As they left the office that night, walking side by side through the empty hallways, Maria felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never experienced before. Her life had taken an unexpected turn, but instead of fearing change, she embraced it with open arms. Mr. Rodriguez was no longer her demanding and intimidating boss, he was her friend, her companion. And together, they had discovered the true meaning of compassion and second chances. Looking towards the future, Maria smiled, excited to see what lay ahead on the road before them.